So if Brian Flores is the best thing that ever happened to the Vikings this season, does that mean he's going to leave at the end of the year? And if so, what do we do about it? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that? 3, 1, 2, 3. You like it?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who do listen to this show every single day. My hashtag everydayers. I just love hearing from you. If you are new here, hello, welcome. My name is Luke Braun, and you can find this show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is anywhere where you listen to lovely podcasts, including SiriusXM. We're partnered with them. You can also find live broadcasts of all the game radio broadcasts on SiriusXM and the SXM app. You can also find the show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app on those smart TVs. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today's Twitter Tuesday on the show. That means I'm taking your questions. And if you ever have a question for me, you can always submit it at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. You can find a Google form in the show notes. That is probably the best way to get it to me, because it aggregates them, and then if you send it to me like on a Wednesday, I'll like see it when I'm aggregating the things rather than having to dig through my DMs. You can also send me an email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com if you prefer. Today, the first question I'm going to answer comes from Landon Renly, who asks, will the Vikings be able to petition the league and get a coordinator franchise tag done fast enough to keep Brian Flores from leaving? Or is there any sort of other sort of black magic to keep him in New York for another year? No, there isn't. And that's okay. Here's the deal. I think we kind of knew he was already getting head coaching interviews when we hired him. We kind of knew this maybe was going to be a little bit of a rental, right? And that perhaps we even knew that we were going to be a little bit of a playground for Flores to try something that had never been tried before, with kind of the pretense that, like, if it doesn't work out, you're probably still getting head coaching interviews anyways, because you already were a head coach and that situation is so unique. It is a unique situation, though. So if you want to know if there's anything the Vikings can do to keep Brian Flores from getting a better position, not only is that a no, but also that's like they shouldn't let him get a head coaching job. If you let him take a step up. Goodness gracious. No, what person would if you have ever worked in a place that like actively tries to prevent you from seeking promotions elsewhere, like if you can get a job that's a step up at another company and they'll actively try to sabotage you, that's one of the biggest employer red flags. You don't want the Vikings to be that org, right? They should be. I want them to be an organization that does right by their employees, right? So you shouldn't want that. But even if you did, no, there's nothing they can do about it. They can block him from taking a DC job elsewhere. They can say, no, you don't get to do that. But if he gets a head coaching offer and he takes it, he's going to take it. If you're looking for cope, if you're looking for wait, how can I hang my hopes on Flores maybe returning? I think the best angle for that is Flores is going to be choosy. Here's the deal. He's going to be in his second stint as a head coach. The first one is obviously controversial. And he's not just going to take any old job. He's not just going to go to the first job that calls him, in the way that I think some coaches that only, that are younger, that aren't going to have their pick of the litter, aren't going to be that choosy. And Flores can afford to sit and wait a couple years and decide what he wants, right? If he does choose to do that. Now, maybe the right opportunity does come along next year and he takes it and, bless you, good luck. But if the Panthers come a-calling with the crappy roster that they have and the overzealous owner that they have, Flores isn't going to want to. I mean, Flores has had enough of overzealous meddling ownership, right? With Stephen Ross, he's not going to get himself into that situation again. So I think there are some criteria that he needs, and if there isn't a job that matches those criteria, he'll return to Minnesota. That's what we have to hope for. But if there is one and he does leave, we don't get to be mad at him for it. Good luck. Go elsewhere. And that leads us to the next question, which is from Kyle Umfed, who asks, if Flores were to leave after this year, is there someone internally they could look to replace him to keep the system intact? So internally, I'm not sure. They lost Chris Rumpf, the D-line coordinator. There's also, I don't know what's going on with Mike Smith or whatever, but he's also not of this system. He's very much a Vic Fangio guy, so and a Mike Pettin guy as well. So I guess there's a couple options. For one, if you're looking internal, you could look at Mike Pettin and say, "Hey, Pettin, are you going to run this scheme? You're off of the stupid scheme that you ran in Green Bay and in Cleveland when you were the head coach and stuff. We're doing this now, and you've been a part of it for a year. Can you pilot this thing?" That might be an option. Durante Jones is also an interesting one. But again, he is not of this scheme. He is of cover 7 quarters, Nick Saban stuff. And what he did at like LSU. So, and like he was a Mike Zimmer hire for the Mike Zimmer scheme. So he's also not like of it. I would say if you want someone to pilot, I mean, nobody is of the scheme except for Flores because this is a new scheme. So yeah, there's nobody there that like grew up in it. But if you're looking for someone to pilot this thing after Flores leaves, I would say look for a Belichick disciple or somebody off of that tree. Somebody, who comes recommended from Flores himself, right? You can talk to him about that. And then you know that he will have people that he says, oh yeah, this guy's great. You can take him. That might not necessarily be internal. And I don't think it has to be. Because I think I agree with what it's the implied premise of this question, which is that the priority is to keep the system intact. The system is working really well, and you need someone that A, understands it and can pilot it, which will probably be the case for all the coaches on the Vikings staff, but B, has the cojones to be aggressive as it allows you to be. Now, I went over this scheme in a ton of detail on Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. It's free to watch. Go check it out. If you watch that video, you will see that the Vikings are doing a lot of really not innovative. They've taken parts from other schemes to better cover behind a blitz, which means that blitzing doesn't carry the same risk as it does for other teams that play it a little bit more aggressively and do things differently on the back end in coverage when they blitz. Because of the way this is structured, it allows you to blitz with less risk, which means you get to blitz more. But you have to trust that that risk is actually lessened. If you still feel like blitzing is risky because you've been in the defensive coach in the league for 30 years and you're still like, I don't know, you just don't feel good about blitzing and you only blitz 30% of the time, then the whole point of this falls apart. So you need someone that's going to be willing to be that aggressive. Flores, yeah, he's insane. For D coordinator, my first and foremost prerequisite for you is how insane are you? Will you jump off? Will you base jump off of a 2-story building onto a trampoline? Are you willing to do that? And if not, then I don't know if you're the right guy for the job. Big Tex Kevin asks, do you think this defense is going to be sustainable for a 4-ish year window, or will the NFC be able to figure it out by then? Blitz heavy schemes always to me is just, loss of 2, loss of 4, 25-yard gain on a missed tackle. Then again, I'm basing this entirely on my own fears. So yeah, when it comes to the long-term sustainability, here's the deal. Someone's going to figure this thing out. Always happens. We did not just come up with the one defensive scheme that nobody can ever solve ever, right? Especially over 4 years. But I wouldn't be surprised if someone figured it out by the end of this year. The Vikings are going to play Cincinnati. They got Zach Taylor over there. Then they play Ben Johnson, who's very good offensive mind, getting head coach interviews most likely. Matt LaFleur, and that's just the regular season, right? If they got to go play in the playoffs and they can, they have to play against Kyle Shanahan again, who might do it, or that might be a third game against Ben Johnson. You best believe after 3 games, Ben Johnson will figure this thing out. Someone's going to figure out how to move the ball against this defense, what the holes really are, how to pick up the blitzes or whatever, how to change the way that they protect. Someone is going to do it. Steel yourself for that. It's the way the league works. There is always going to be something. But that doesn't necessarily mean the scheme will die as soon as one person cracks the code. People crack the code of the Fangio scheme. There's still lots of teams running that. I mean, the Saban stuff ran for 25 years, even though there's absolutely beaters for it. So will it be sustainable? I think that depends a lot on where Brian Flores goes next and what kind of organization that actually is. If he gets what he wants, basically, and is able to see sustained success elsewhere, and if the Vikings are able to see sustained success here, which means that there's now two teams that are experiencing success, and then other teams are going to want to jump on the wagon and start hiring off of those staffs, and that's how this thing will spread over a couple of years if it actually does manage to stay successful. And I do think that it can find that level of success. And somebody's going to figure out how to move the ball, but that's not a death knell. Boy, I have so many more questions to get to. I just did not get to enough. So we're going to pick up the pace coming up. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime. You can probably hear I'm still pretty hoarse. If you didn't know, I was at the game, getting loud, and threw my voice out like any God-fearing fan should. But boy, getting to that thing was tough. So my dad and I were planning this trip like 5 months ago, like before the season even started, and already getting tickets was hard. So if you just decide in the middle of a football season, man, the Vikings are kind of fun, I would love to go to a game or whatever you want. Wolves game, right? Wolves are pretty fun. You want to get to a Wolves game and you want to do it spontaneously and last minute. Gametime is here for you. They've got deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the best place to find last minute tickets, and the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Gametime will credit 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. If you are watching on YouTube, watch all the way to the end and then just let it play. It will take you to a 24/7 live feed of all Locked On Minnesota shows on the Locked On Minnesota Podcast Network, or on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube page. You could also just go right to that page and find it that way too. Strongly encourage it. Great thing to throw on in the background. Get all your Minnesota sports talk from Wolves, Wild, of course, Vikings, and the roundtables out Locked On Minnesota Sports and all of that. Let's move on with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Next one comes from Daryl Wacker, who says, why wasn't the hit on Jefferson a penalty for hitting a defenseless receiver? I'm super glad you asked this because I wanted to talk about this a little bit. Since we just had that big controversy with the Broncos, and that was a pretty big hit, and it ended up in an injury, right? So a couple of things that I think Marcus Epps did correctly on that one to not get flagged. For one, he angled his body such that the shoulder was the leading point of contact and not the crown of the helmet. That's a really big one. And for two, he didn't launch. He did not leave his feet on the tackle, which is good habit for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to make you a lot less likely to be flagged for the hit, but two, it gives you a more stable ground to stand on, and it'll be harder to make that tackle miss. You won't be as liable to whiff Marcus Williams style, Minneapolis Miracle style, right? So I thought that was a really good example. If you want to ask what are defenders supposed to do in whatever situation? That was a really good example of what defenders are supposed to do. There's a clean hit, should not have been flagged. Hard hit, you can hit, you're allowed to hit hard. That is legal. Hard hit, good hit, unfortunate injury, but I think very clear textbook no call. Bad Dad Joke asks, after listening to Mark Sanchez rip on this pathetic performance for hours, I was left with one question. Which is more embarrassing, Vikings offense under Dobbs or the butt fumble? That was clearly the butt fumble. The butt fumble was a defensive touchdown. Josh Dobbs did not have any defensive touchdowns. So even just based on that, right, that's already more embarrassing. And Josh Dobbs is a whole game. The butt fumble is one particular isolated play. But also the entire game, I guess, well, yeah, if you're just focusing on the offensive side of the ball, like it was bad, but like it wasn't even the worst offense on the field that day. The butt fumble is the worst thing that happened to a dude in his whole career, which is still an active career, and it's like probably still going to be true. So definitely the butt fumble. Austin Tyler asks, do you think if Mullins is just decent, Vikings can win the next few games with the way the defense is playing? Austin Tyler, I don't think I've seen your name before, so I pulled this one because this is a big principle for me. Always any given Sunday. I'm a big any given Sunday guy. So sure, they can. Will they? I don't know. If you knew the answer to that, Vegas wouldn't make any money. But yeah, the defense is playing great. But like I said, bunch of good offensive brains on the horizon. someone's going to figure it out. It's just not realistic to expect someone not to eventually look at all the tape and go, oh, I think I've got the idea, right? A couple of teams have super turtled with quarterbacks they don't trust. Maybe the Bengals do the same because they don't trust Jake Browning. I would love that. But someone is going to have an answer. What that is, then the question becomes about how they can adapt, and that's going to be what all this comes down to. But yeah, sure, why not? They can win all those games. They could lose all those games too. Making this prediction to me is never going to be anything that you can't learn anything by just being right or wrong about games. Honestly, it's more luck than anything. None of us are really that good. So I find that question always the best answer is sure. Yeah. Can they? Yeah, of course. Will they? Great question. Minnesotans against Dobbs driving. Goodness. Says that KOC had a surprisingly long leash on Dobbs, and it nearly cost us the game. I know there's utility in letting people play through adversity and that it allows them to play loose. At some point, though, isn't he doing a disservice to Mullins, who has been in camp and put in the work and hasn't been given the opportunity? I want to say... Oh, no, it nearly cost us the game. Yeah, so I think I agree with you that the leash was too long, right? That they did it late. And I said that on the Minnesota Football Party. I said that on Locked On Vikings yesterday, if you want to go listen to that for kind of my rationale. And I'll probably go into it deeper on Patreon and on the show too. So I'll spare you for now. But yeah, he was too long of a leash, correct. And yes, absolutely correct to not have a short leash, right? You don't want just the opposite version of the problem. But yeah, perhaps too long of a leash. The disservice it does to Mullins, I don't think is a big consideration there, because this ain't a fair world, man. Like Jaron Hall had a good drive and got concussed, now is QB3 again. That's not fair. That is not a meritocracy. It's never been designed to be fair. It's not supposed to be fair. It's football. Football ain't fair. So is he doing a disservice to Mullins, who like deserves the opportunity? I don't think that would be the reason that was the wrong decision, but it wasn't the wrong decision ultimately because he did it, and the Vikings won the game on it. So you get to say, yay, I was late, but hey, better late than never, right? Rather lose one game because of a bad decision than two. Get Quackin asks, so as president of the Ivan Pace fan club, we have a lot of unspent money on our hands as of late. Are there any other players, offense or defense, that you think are undervalued and show potential for growth that the IPFC should invest in? Also, a long back and forth between him and someone else about who truly is the president of the Ivan Pace fan club. I think you guys should know that there is room enough for the two of you. If there is one thing Ivan Pace is known for, it's that there's more size there than you think. Yeah, so Ivan Pace, phenomenal game, obviously. Other unheralded players, like I would say Josh Metellus, but he just signed a contract, so that's clearly not in it. Cam Bynum, I think, is in line for a payday. Caleb Evans is not eligible for a payday yet because he's a 2022 draft pick, so he's got a little bit of a ways. But I think he's playing his way there as just a good, big physical corner that has very quietly had a really good year. That whole secondary, that could be a good, if you're looking for like an elevator on the ground floor to get in on, probably Caleb Evans is my best answer to that question. Otherwise you got to look at somebody like Jaquelin Roy and then hope he has a breakout game next year, hope you're really early to that train and that he's just a rotational player for now, but he really is going to break out, that kind of thing. 1991 Ford Tempo Enthusiast says, Andrew Booth has been back on the bench lately. Do you think that's because of performance or just the game plan? Probably because of Caleb Evans is back. I think he got more run because they just were thinner and they just went back to the backup, but now Caleb Evans is back. So thanks for your service and back to the bench you go. Although with a Caleb Evans in, he did rotate in sometimes with Mekhi Blackman and stuff and Byron Murphy. It probably depends a lot on health, but yeah, sometimes you might think that they throw deep a lot. We want fresher corners and we'll put our fourth guy in a little bit more. I don't think it's merit. I haven't really seen anything on tape that would suggest that he should be pulled and yanked and, thrown under a train or anything. I think it's just, the way the game goes. When you're the fourth guy, sometimes you're on the bench. 710 Tate says, why did JJ not play the first snap? So the first snap of this game was a pistol, 2 running back pistol read option. Super cool stuff. And I was thinking, oh, cool. They redesigned a whole bunch of stuff around Dobbs. Really, they just sort of tacked some zone read onto things. And I think they changed their formations a little bit. and that was kind of it. But yeah, that was that. I would guess that that's a play that just can't check into a pass, so you might as well give him a playoff. Like, who cares, right? He technically didn't get a start. Non-starting wide receiver Justin Jefferson. Backup receiver Justin Jefferson didn't start the game. Yeah, I guess you could technically say that, but I think it's just because they decided that they were going to start with that weird run play. And I'm going to guess because of all of the reading and stuff that's going on, they didn't also want to add a check to a pass. That's a lot for everybody to get down. Got a few more questions. I want to make sure that I get to all of them. So we'll try not to get stuck on some of your weirdest ones, but I love them. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by DoorDash. Absolutely unbelievably clutch thing. Tomorrow, I've got a big dinner to make. I'm having somebody over. And DoorDash is going to be very clutch for the groceries because I will not have time to grocery shop just because of, the in-season work schedule gets pretty crazy. And that is what DoorDash can get you, groceries. And of course, restaurants, retail, all kinds of stuff, way more than you think is on DoorDash, including all of your favorite restaurants, the chains that are go-tos for everybody, as well as some of those local mom and pop shops that you might not even know about if you don't find them on that DoorDash menu because they aren't on a street that you go on or whatever. You can get 50% off of up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. When you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23, subject to change, terms apply. That's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Just download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Let's wrap things up with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. The next one comes from Scold, who asks, with Madison possibly out, is Myles Gaskin getting called up from the practice squad? I know you're high on Dwayne McBride before the season. Is the team totally out on him? Well, no, if they were totally out on him, they wouldn't have him on the practice squad, right? I think this is, people get a lot of times really like short term in the week to week of the season, which I totally get, right? Because every game is kind of its own contained thing. But when you are a draft pick and then you don't make the team and then you're on the practice squad, unless injuries require you to be pulled back up from the practice squad, a lot of times that is just an incubation place. You go, okay, look, man, you didn't make the team. We've got this, and that issue with the way that you play, and we want you to work on it. No pressure at all. Be on the scout team. Don't worry about game plans. Don't fill your head with all this stuff. Because when you are on the active roster, you aren't getting better. You're preparing for the Bengals. And there's really different stuff. You're practicing your game plan plays and you're trying to get the reads down and you're learning all of that stuff that's very useful in the short term of that particular game and then ceases to be useful next time when you've got different plays and different reads to learn. But when you're on the scout team, you're helping in practice. You're helping to simulate and stuff. So there's some of it where you're not just sitting there like lifting every day, right? But you do have a little bit more leeway to be like, yeah, and I'm going to work on my footwork today, and I'm going to try to learn this different kind of step today, or I'm going to work on whatever the coach told me to work on today. And you get a whole year to do that, and then there's some patience to the approach too, where you just say like, no, look, like this, don't worry about the getting on the field at all this year. All right, take a whole year, and we're not even going to check on you. All right, take your year, do what you got to do, and we'll come back at this next camp. And that can be a decision that they make in August, and then they stick to it, right? So that doesn't mean they're out on them, and certainly not being in as a 7th round pick, not being in the game by December 10th of your or on the active roster by December 10th of your rookie season, certainly not out on them. Definitely a lot left of that book to be written. That said, I thought he would make the team. I was wrong. Happens. Minnesota Sports Appreciator says everyone has dunked on Madison this year, but he just had a great game against the Raiders. Did he figure it out, or is Las Vegas just not that great? I think a lot of people are just wrong, man. I've been saying this for weeks on this show. if you want to go listen to some Madison episodes, I've done some like pretty in-depth ones if you want to go check them out, and also some Patreon things that are all free to watch now. But yeah, people are really grossly wrong about Madison's vision. His vision's fine. I think I like his percentage of what I would call misreads, which has some guesswork in it. It's all subjective, so we can all be humble about that. But compared to the misreads that like Cam Akers had when he was running for the Vikings, good God, that feels like 4 years ago. The seasons get long. But when Cam Akers, I mean, and he had just gotten here, so it was a little understandable, but Ty Chandler also, I think, misreads more often than Madison did. And he's had a couple of games where he's like really balled out. And I think we just, I don't know, people just latch onto him as public enemy number one. And then anything he does that's good, it was just that play. And anything he does that's bad, you go, I'm vindicated. He is bad. And it's like how it sticks in your mind, you know? But no, I think he's always been, I think he's been doing better than he gets credit for, and especially in the last month, I thought he'd been playing pretty well. So I'm not surprised to see that at all. Minnesota Sports Appreciator also says, give a 15-second review on Allegiant Stadium. I was at the game. It's like if US Bank Stadium had no cool amenities, and instead just like some statues of memorabilia around. And that was like it. Like US Bank Stadium does have some of those, but they got like the museum and like cool fan experiences and stuff. And Allegiant Stadium, for what we found and we explored pretty well, very cool, very pretty, very comfortable venue. Not a ton to do once you get inside. That was at least my review on it. Maybe I missed it. Anti-Gravity said, what's a worse eternal punishment, being forced to drive between Victorville and Jean without ever getting to Vegas, or having to watch the first 55 minutes of that game tape on repeat? Man, I will always watch game tape. You get fantastic defense game tape. That's not a punishment. I'll do that all day. Yeah, man. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. So it's definitely the drive, which is a pretty boring drive. Thomas Raines asks, any thoughts on if the NFL is somewhat fixed? Okay, I've had this one holstered for a while and I just haven't been able to get to it. Is the NFL fixed? Definitely not. Here's why. So I'm sure that there are some implicit biases in terms of officiating that favor the home team. I think that's part of home field advantage. And as much as referees are trained to put this out of their heads, we are ultimately human creatures, and I don't think it's entirely possible to get all of the I don't want to get booed bias out of your brain. I just think that's a human lizard brain thing that's just, you can fight it as much as you want, or maybe overcorrect for it, but you're just never going to comfortably be out of that ever. Like you might think you are, you might say, no, I'm not being biased with this call, but it's going to creep in there sometimes and you're not going to be aware of it. It's just lizard brain stuff. That said, that's not fixed. That's a bias that I think I just chalk up to part of home field advantage. That's just part of the game. I don't think that if the NFL is actually fixed, like if it's script writers and all that, or even if it's just fixed where you have, the Buffalo Wild Wings button for a good Vegas thing. For one, Vegas does take some pretty hideous L's that they would probably use that for. But for two, that's just too big of a conspiracy. There's too many people involved. Someone would leak more, right? Like this, you're not going to keep this a secret. When you see the actual scandals like this, they come out, right? Like the key fob thing and wrestling and all that. Like they come out. It's not, it's been 100 years of the NFL. If it's fixed, we would figure. I mean, come on, what journalist wouldn't want to be the guy that broke the story that the NFL is fixed, right? Like anyone would do that and be set for life with book deals and stuff. So no, it's not fixed. We can hang our hats on that. Malcolm Biggles says, now that KOC has mastered the one score game, do you anticipate the remaining games this season to be decided by more than one score? So is the implication that because he won a literal one score, there was one score in the game, that now it's like we've beaten the final boss, like you've solved the riddle and the rest of the games are allowed to be I love that. Yes, I agree. Yes, absolutely. Mary Skullbus asks, with your experience in knowing deep X's and O's, does it change the way you watch a live game? Would you compare it differently to how you used to watch games? Oh my God, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, big time. And I love the way that it has changed the way that I watch the game. It has enhanced it so much for me. And it's what I wanted. Like if I were to go kind of talk to 2015, 2016 me and ask, hey, why do you want to get into football stuff? The answer I would have given you back then is because I want to know more about what's going on. I'm curious. Fundamentally, I'm curious about the sport. And I can't find that information aggregated anywhere. And the reason I have now come to learn is because there's too much information. The answer to those questions are just too numerous and too broad to ever put in one single location. I mean, it would be a 1,500 page book, right? If you wanted to put together everything that is interesting about football. That's what makes this sport beautiful. It's so complex. But knowing more about it and being able to do things like, hey, if you go watch my Brian Flores video on Patreon and then you watch the Vikings defense, you can be like, oh, 5-0 front. Oh, and then they brought a bandit down, or 3-4 under, a lot of 3-4 under in the Raiders game, and then they brought some bandits in for a 6-man front and totally shut down the run game. That's what they've been doing all year, and you can see it live, and you can understand the cat and mouse game, and you go, oh wow, they brought in another tight end, and then the Vikings changed to a different front. Whoa, that's so interesting. You're never going to hear that kind of crap on TV. You're never going to hear that kind of crap from mainstream sources. You're only going to be able to get that if you apply yourself and really make an effort to broaden your understanding in that way. And for a lot of people, that's not what they want at all. And that's totally fine, right? Play fantasy football, just, make a bet on the game, and that's what you want. I respect that. Absolutely. Hope you still listen. Please come along for the ride. But there is a great, genuine joy that I have gotten for myself just by making the effort to learn. And I can't recommend enough that you follow me on that journey. That's kind of what this show's supposed to be. Eric the Red asks, are Wolves back? Yes. No. Nope. Krill asks, what's with all the drops? So I saved this one for last because that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow on the Locked On Vikings podcast. I'm going to do a deeper investigation on the drops. I mean, I was sitting in the stands from my particular angle far away, so I don't want to make any sweeping declarations, but I'm going to pull all the things that people could have possibly thought of as a drop, make a Patreon about it, make a podcast about it, write an article about it, do the whole thing. I'm going to dive really deep on that. What is a drop? What should be a drop? What counts as a drop? What should count? All of that stuff. That is coming up tomorrow. And then we do crossover Thursday with the Bengals guys and bold predictions and all that on Friday. So get them cooking. I'll see y'all for that. And as always, Skull.